we're just going to be scratching into what appears to be pretty much the last section of the book. And then this is only going to be a short little episode here, actually. Ah, Susie, you're still hanging with me. I love learning about the nakshatras as well. They are really, there's just so much to them, and I can't learn enough about them. Susie has asked, are there any planetary placements in Magha that would make a person resist connecting with their ancestors or have difficulty finding info on their father's side of the family? It's possible. I would say, Susie, that if somebody has a planet in Magha, and that implies that, especially if that's an important planet to the person, that implies that there is an agenda in the planet. And if there's afflictions or blocks or any kind of difficulty associated with that planet, it's bound to get frustrated with its agenda. This is the case for all planets falling in all nakshatras in all signs. So in the case of, let's take for example, a man whose sun has fallen into Magha Nakshatra, if there is any afflictions to that sun, the sun in Magha is happy regardless, typically. But, it's likely possible, when you think about it, the patrilineal energy of Magha is something that comes from within. That energy, you can experience that energy without getting knowledge of your previous ancestors. You can experience that energy because that energy is inside. So a person with the sun in Magha could find ways of applying themselves to their dharma, especially the sun is a sattvic planet. It would be good to, whatever afflictions might occur that would stop a person from getting a sense of that patrilineal energy, there are remedies to it, and the remedies would be involving with puja and with putting a little bit of heartfelt, meditative, contemplative reflection on what I think the energy that's coming through me, how that could possibly relate to my father's energy and to his father's energy, etc. Because again, that energy is there. If a Cuban person wants to learn about his ancestry, he doesn't necessarily need to read it in a book. He just needs to look within. He doesn't even need to talk to other Cuban people. If you reflect, and you meditate, and you do puja, and you make an obeisance, a prayer of sorts, a worshipful gesture towards the patrilineal lineage of your ancestors. Doesn't got to be anything too fancy. There are ways of doing it. Gosh, I wish I could think of the word for you. But there's something that is done around Halloween. But people do it actually all the time. Some people do it every day. Some people do it twice a day in India. It's where you give a worshipful gesture to your patrilineal and matrilineal lineages. You treat them with a prayer, and you mentally focus as if you were talking to somebody in front of you, as if they were a real entity that you're engaging with. And that can get you a connection to the energy conveyed and conferred by Magha. Because that authoritative energy that comes from within can always be tapped into, because that's really where it comes from again. Outside of that, to answer your question concisely, Susie, I would say there are placements of planets in Magha that can actually block and resist a person with connecting to their ancestors or have difficulty in finding information on their father's side of the family. I'd say it can. Usually it's a reduction of research capacities or something wrong with the fourth house or the fourth house lord or even the 5th house or 5th house lord, because those things have to do with the root. The 5th house is like the fixed sign pouring out of the root. So having troubles with the 5th lord, which relates to Leo and the sun, you know, so the 5th lord in the 5th house, if there's struggles and afflictions there, it can show the person has an incapacity to feel the importance of being connected to their patrilineal lineage. Remedies can be very useful for all these sorts of things. Depends on the affliction that's going on there, but ultimately I would lean whatever affliction a person might has that causes that, I'd lean out of astrology and into just what can you practically do? You know, what can you do to connect with your ancestral information? And if there's nothing physical, no physical evidence, if a person's adopted, they have no sense whatsoever of their biological father, you're going to have to go the energy route. And if you understand it and if you believe it properly, you can tap into the same thing. It's there. It's within you. You just don't have an easy route to it, but it's there. I hope that was useful to your question there, Susie. Feel free to ask me any questions anytime, Susie, because you're one of my good ones on here. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That was a good answer for you. Now, folks, we have our last bit of our section here to talk about the Pitris, to talk about their nature, to talk about what exactly they are, and then eventually this will lead us into a conversation about the Magha Native. But let's begin at the beginning. It's interesting that when we look at... I've still got to do my little intro, and I'm going to do that right now. I just want to take a quick peek here. Right. Usually I have a little picture of this. I'm going to thank you all for your patience. Very good. Okay. I'm going to do my introduction now, just so that we can start rolling with this part of this video. Greetings, folks. It's nice to see you. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is a continuation of our reading on Magha Nakshatra. In particular, we're going to be reading about the deity of Magha Nakshatra, which is called the Pitrinam, the Pitris. These are the patrilineal lineage of ancestry. So that's your father, your father's father, your father's father's father, etc. These are the people, this is the energy line which conveys the conservative narrowing that Magha represents, the conservative narrowing of deviations. We can all deviate from the path to goodness, but we have a fatherly energy inside of all of us that desires to curb, just like how a father in any family situation is going to be a little bit tough to curb the family away from that which is not good, to protect, to keep them in line with what cannot harm them. The Pitrinam is the law of karma in a ancestral, there's an ancestral connection to how we abide by the law of karma. It's a living thing. It's something that can be worshipped. As we've talked about in our Magha Nakshatra video previously, the Pitris are actually many cultures in India, many parts of Indian culture will worship it, the Pitrinam, as well as the Matrinam, the motherly lineage of ancestors. They will pray and give puja, give gestures of worship to these living lineages that are living and moving through us. We are the central conduit between our patrilineal and matrilineal ancestry. We are them, and they are us. So it's the part of self-realization at some level if you look at it and understand it correctly. I've been telling, part of my whole shtick is that, I'm somebody who's interested in psychedelic consciousness and various ways of entering altered states. And there is a medicine, there's a psychedelic entheogen called Tabernemphe iboga that is said to connect one to one's ancestors. It comes from Africa. It's a root. It's a whole part of their initiation ceremony, and it has psychedelic-bearing effects. I've gotten in touch with one of the sister or cousins of the Tabernemphe iboga, and it's called Tabernemphe manii. I've been exploring it, and when I meditate and when I experience my connection to the lineages of ancestry, it brings to mind this whole question of like the self, the past lives. How do my ancestries relate to my past lives? And when I listen within to the genetic continuum of energy that's coming through me, which of it is me and which of it is my ancestors? Or is it all one? I don't know, but these are experiences that I've been having in this regard. I'm sure some of you who are into, this is almost supernatural, what we're talking about at this point. Pitrinam are almost considered to be ghosts of a sort. Although Pitri relates to father, that's what that word means, and Matri relates to mother. So it's not the same as like a disembodied spirit or demon who lives inside a rock. That's not the same as the patrilineal and matrilineal lineages. But it relates to our etheric continuum connection of the heart to those who have birthed us. And it's interesting to think about what all this means to us when we reflect, when we meditate. There are some times when I am exploring this Tabernemphe manii substance where I'll sit with myself and I'll be meditating, and I'll be just listening within to what's trying to come through me. And how I describe it is kind of like this. There are some times when something will come through me. It's a thought. And, sometimes thoughts are just thoughts. If I think of a granola bar, it's probably because I'm hungry. But sometimes things will just randomly come through me for no reason. And how I've described it is like, imagine standing in a river. And you're walking through this river, and something comes along and touches your leg, and it feels slimy. It's like, ugh, was that a fish, or was that a piece of seaweed? Because when I'm in a river, sometimes I think like, oh, did I just get touched by a fish? And maybe it was just seaweed. Now think about how this relates as a metaphor to when you're sitting and meditating, and some thought comes along that you wouldn't naturally think about. Was that me? Was that a piece of seaweed? Or was that a fish? Was that an ancestor? Was that a message from the beyond? Was that a message from the divine? Was that an ancestral piece of something? And what is that? How does that relate with me? These are all things that I'm very interested in, and I'm exploring it in a new book that I'm writing. It's called The Eternal Soul Afternoon, and that will be coming out soon. It's exploring all this stuff that I'm, not necessarily just the stuff I'm talking about, but this is a piece of it. So, in any case, the Pitrinam is something that's considered, Pitrinam and Matrinam are very important in India, and in the context of the nakshatras, the Pitris specifically are an important dimension of the nakshatra of Magha. The nakshatras are an incredibly important aspect. They are, as we've heard from Victakara, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. That's what the nakshatras are. So to Magha being one of these nakshatras shows that the Pitris are quite important. So we're going to do a reading today, and this is coming from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas. This is from an author named Radha. I've just given you guys my ideas and my experience with the Pitris and with Magha. Now we're going to be reading from an author who has a pretty good dedicated nose to researching the guts of how a nakshatra and its deities relates to classical Vedic literature. Now, this author takes her literary source not from the Taittiriya Brahmana. If you've been watching this series, I'm really big on how the Taittiriya Brahmana is the vital commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda that comes from Vedic era literature that is 27 concise depictions of the essence of the nakshatra energies. So the Taittiriya Brahmana is very special and important. It's undistorted, you know. This author is a sidereal practitioner, and she gets her information from not just the Taittiriya Brahmana. She gets it even from the Rig Veda. She'll usually show little bits. She'll go through the whole Vedic corpus of literature and point out where this deity or this nakshatra is mentioned. So it's a great reading. It's always just good to keep in mind that she is a sidereal practitioner, whereas I'm tropical. It's good for us to always take a grain of salt to certain qualities that she affirms to the nakshatra. What I love about her is that she always says, the reason I'm saying this is because it's in this book. So it's important information for us learning about, you know, the nakshatras are not new. They're the oldest thing going. They're even older than the 12 zodiac signs. But here in the West, we've only heard so much about them. So that's why it's good for us as Western interpreters of ancient Eastern things to provide these caveats for the sources of our information, so we don't get led astray or deviate from what is good. Now, this little picture is an important one here. This is just going to show that all of the nakshatras are grouped in certain ways. There's the Vishvadevas, Prajalpati, and Brahaspati. These are 4 nakshatras whose deities are kind of outside the main pale. And the Pitris are also a subterranean aspect of our consciousness that is also outside of the main 3. The Vasus is like, you know, I always say with the Gayatri mantra, if you've ever heard it, Boom, Aum, Boom, Bhuva, Svaha. These are the 3 worlds. Boom is the Vasus, which are elemental. Rudras are atmospheric and emotional. And then the Adityas are sattvic and spiritual. They're devas. The Pitris are outside of the 3. So they are this sort of this connector piece of karma between incarnations. So that gives them an interesting status. They're one of the standout nakshatras, and that's why they're interesting to talk about. Now let's start reading from our source text so we can start to get a sense of what this all means. And again, this is a short episode today. We are here talking about our ancient ancestors, the Pitris, and that is the upholders of Magha Nakshatra. Now, right away, we hear a reference from the Rig Veda as the beginning quote that we get from the author, and it says, "May you be united with your forefathers, also with Yama, and experience the fulfillment of your wishes in the highest heaven. May you discard iniquity and seek your new abode and unite yourself to another celestial body. So obviously those who were writing out the Rig Veda already understood what the Pitris were. It's amazing that the Rig Veda was written so long ago, before the nakshatras were even a thing or even conceived. The Rig Veda is just deep enigmatic code, but they use the names of all the figures that end up flourishing in later Vedic literature as the nakshatras, as the various gods and goddesses of the whole Vedic corpus. So even in the Rig Veda, the Pitris, the forefathers, are connected with Yama and are connected with this in-between place between one incarnation and another. Susie's mentioned, I'm interested in how people experience ancestral energy, both recently transitioned loved ones and ancient ancestors, especially if you take rebirth in a new-to-you culture. Yeah, there's a lot there to think about, Susie, in terms of reincarnating and all of what that means to us. Yama does take us to the Pitris, and Pitris also take us to Yama. Yama is the judge, and the judge is like the boss. When the boss comes along, if you haven't been doing your work, he's going to slap you on the wrist. But if you have been doing your work, he rewards you. So that's why you're right that people fear him in a way, but ultimately Yama is neutral in the Vedic ideology. I think people just get spooked by the idea of death and things beyond this life that can come and get them. They're like the police, in a way, the Yamas and the Pitris. But again, if you have been doing the right things, then you have nothing to fear with the police, most times. But people still get intimidated when the big box-chested uniformed person comes along. And I think it's the same reason why people get spooked by Yama. Now, this is chapter 27 of the book. This is considered, this is the last nakshatra that is written about in this book. Chapter 27 begins by talking about the Sapta Rishis, the 7 Rishis, and Manu Vaivashvata. The 33 divine forces are identified in the Vedas as the Aditya, the Rudras, and the Vasu category of gods, as we've described. And as well, Prajalpati and Brahaspati are considered part of the divine forces. These same category gods, as well as the Sapta Rishis, the 7 Rishis, and Manu Vaivashvata, and his kingly sons. These are all declared the ruling monarchs of the current Vaivasvata Manvantara. It's a period lasting 306.7 million years. You can see that in chapter 1, the 33 divine forces of the Rig Veda, which I believe I have somewhere on my channel, in my Nakshatra readings playlist. So, as discussed in this chapter, the Sapta Rishis and Manu Vaivashvata are the great ancestors of mankind and the ruling devatas of Magha. So that's the 7 Rishis and Manu Vaivashvata. Manu being almost considered to be the first human, a lot of people describe it as. And here we have a quote from the Vishnu Purana, it's book 3, chapter 1, which says, "The Manu of the present period is the wide lord of obsequies," that's Vaivashvata, who is the illuminous and illustrious offspring of the sun. The deities are the Adityas, the Vasus, and the Rudras. Their sovereign is Purandara, or Indra. Vashishta, Kashyapa, Atri, Jamadagni, Gautama, Vishvamitra, and Bharadvaja. These are the 7 rishis, and the 9 pious sons of Vaivashvata Manu are the kings. So these 9 pious sons of Vaivashvata Manu are Ikshvaku, Nabhaga, Drishta, Sanyati, Narishyanta, Nabhanadista, Karusha, Prishadra, and the celebrated Vasumat. So this is giving, the Vedic ideology has this idea that there's always a cosmology built into every phase of time. And in this 306 million year age, the Manu, the originating man of the present period, is this Lord of Obsequies, Vaivashvata, and all of the deities that we've described, the 3 layers. It's all working in today's time. And the Vedic people have put this in the Vishnu Purana. Stipulated in the above Puranic passage, we can see the 7 names of the 7 rishis, the Sapta rishis. And it's noted that the Srimad Bhagavatam identifies these same sages in Canto 8, Chapter 13. In other scriptures, there are other sage names that replace them, such as the Yajurveda. But in any case, each rishi is an important contributor to the Rig Veda. Of particular interest are those Sapta rishis identified with the Angiras and Brighu Gotras, for these 2 lineages are believed to be the most ancient. The Angiras lineage includes Bharadvaja, who did the 6th mandala for the Rig Veda, as well as Gautama, who's a contributor of many Rig Vedic hymns. Both of these are members of the Sapta rishis. Other Angiras descendants are Brihaspati, Vamadeva, who wrote Rig Veda Mandala 4, and Gritsamada, who wrote Rig Veda Mandala 2. Gritsamada is later anointed into the Brighu Gotra. So over 1/3 of all Rig Vedic suktas are cognized and created by the Angirases. It's very interesting to see these deep roots of the classic idea of where the Vedic lore comes from. Now, the Brighu Gotra includes Jamadagni, who wrote Rig Veda Mandala 8, who is also one of the Sapta rishis. Notably, less than 10% of Rig Vedic hymns are attributed to the Brighu ancestry. Still, the only existing recension of the Rig Veda available today is a Brighu recension, the Shakala. So, yeah, that's interesting. What she's saying is that 10% of the Rig Vedic hymns are attributed classically to the Brighu folks. But the only existing recension that has come through time is the one conveyed by the Brighu recension, called the Shakala. Now, by the later Vedas and Brahmanas, the Brighus assumed the more prominent literary position. For example, the Taittiriya Samhita, the Black Yajurveda, as well as the Vajraseni Samhita, the Shukla Yajurveda. These are both authored by disciples of Vaishampayana, who is a Brighu descendant. Further, the only fully intact version of the Atharva Veda, that's the Shanakya, is also a Brighu recension. Interestingly, this text was co-authored by sage Angiras, who was, of course, an Angiras, and sage Atharvan, who was a Brighu. Originally known as the Atharvangiras, the name is later changed to Atharva Veda, i.e., only the Brighu lineage name survives. Interesting. So the Brighus end up being key players in the Vedic literature, at least as far as attribution goes. Now, the Atharva Veda is composed of two types of hymns. One category includes charms of an auspicious nature used to confer health, wealth, marriage, progeny, kingly power, and so on. These charms are the contribution of sage Atharvan. The hymns of sage Angiras address the more hostile or inauspicious aspects of life. These are spells or curses direct at various demonic forces, diseases, enemies, rivals, and occult matters such as possession by spirits. The difference in contribution between these two sages provides unique insight into the particular adeptness of their respective gotras. As mentioned earlier, Vaishampayana is of the Brighu lineage. The Mahabharata is narrated by Vyasa to this sage. Other members of the Brighu lineage include Shukracharya, Parashurama, the sixth Mahavatara incarnation of Vishnu, as well as Valmiki, author of the Ramayana. In light of the significant contribution by the Angirases to the hymns of the Rig Veda, some scholars theorize that the Angirases were the inner circle during these ancient Vedic times. Yet, as noted above, the influence of the Brighus eventually makes its way into the Vedic scriptures, most notably in those texts revealing the ways of the sacrifice, the Yajurveda, and the Itihasas, the epics. Wow. Amazing. The Puranic legends and myths of Brihaspati, Jupiter, an Angiras, and Shukracharya, Venus, a Brighu, suggest that the Angirases and Brighus were of a very different mind, and even potential adversaries. Whoa. Brihaspati is the guru to the gods, and wise in the Vidya of the Rig Veda and other lofty matters, such as philosophy. Shukracharya of Venus. Shukracharya is the guru of the Asuras, and is knowledgeable in the sciences and arts, including the science of spirituality, i.e. the science of the sacrifice as specified in the Yajurveda. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna proclaims, "Among those highly situated in Vedic culture, I am Brihaspati, and among learned scholars I am Shukracharya, the knower of spiritual science." That's the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the cream of the Vedic crop, according to a lot of people. The best of the Puranas. Now, the two planetary camps in Jyotisha are seemingly aligned with the same schematic. One camp includes Jupiter as Brihaspati, as well as the Sun, Moon, and Mars. And the other camp is of Shukracharya. That's Venus, Mercury, and Saturn. I've shown many pictures where you can see these two splits in this camp. These two camps in this split, I should say. Now, according to the Puranas, the planets also manifest from the sacred lineages of the rishis and or their intermarriages. The sun, Vivashvan, with Aditi's shadow image Chaya, gives birth to Saturn. Kashyapa, which is Vivashvan's Puranic father, and wife Deity, who's Aditi's sister, they give birth to Simhika, who is the mother of Rahu and Ketu. From the Sephir Tapas of sage Atri, the moon is birthed. Brahaspati, son of Rishi Angiras, marries Tara, who, through an affair with the moon, gives birth to Mercury. Agni, closely associated with the Angirases in the Rig Veda, is the father of Mars, Skanda. And lastly, of course, Venus, given the name Shukracharya, is the offspring of sage Brighu himself. Now we read in a footnote that the divine origin of the planets is similarly noted by the sage Parashara in the Brihat Parashara Horashastra. Here, Parashara proclaims the planets as divine incarnations of Vishnu. Wow. The remaining Saptarishis father many pious sages. Sage Parashara, author of the Brihat Parashara Horashastra, is the grandson of Rishi Vishvamitra. In the Puranas, sage Kashyapa takes the place of Rigvedic Daksha Prajalpati and parents the Adityas. Aditi journeys to heaven with her newborn sons to meet the gods, but leaves their last-born Vivashvat behind. Vivashvat serves as the sun within the earthly realm, acting on humanity's behalf. He marries Saranyu and gives birth to Manu Vaivashvata, a solar king, as we have heard. Manu Vaivashvata's unique contribution is the initiation of a lineage which gives birth to the human race itself. This is coming from the Mahabharata of Krishna Dvaipanyana Vyasa, Book 1, section, I believe, 125. So that's where this comes from. It's so said in the Mahabharata that Manu Vaivashvata was endued with great wisdom and devoted to virtue, and he became the progenitor of a line. And in Manu's race have been born all human beings, who have therefore been called Manavas, of the race of man, Manu. Wow, that's pretty rock and roll. Now this means that mankind is endowed with two divine heritages. One ancestry originates with the Saptarishis, a Brahmin lineage responsible for the birth of many enlightened sages. The other lineage begins with Manu Vaivashvata, who's a solar king, a Kshatriya, and his 9 sons. So hence, the Saptarishis and Manu Vaivashvata are the divine ancestors of mankind, and are therefore truly the ruling devatas of Magha. For the correlation between these two divine lineages and Devayana, the path of the Devas, and Pitrayana, the path of the ancestors, there is a separate chapter in this book describing this, known as the path of the luminaries. It's not a huge chapter, and for the sake of it, since we're here, I think we got to go through it. Yeah, let's do it. Because this is the end of the Pitri chapter of chapter 27. We're going to come back and we're going to read through the nature of the Pitrina, the Magha Native. But this is a part of what we're doing here. So let's go through chapter 28. This is the path of the luminaries, where we're kind of defining, I can see in my notes here, I've read through this before, and there's sort of a moon and a sun. The sun being like a spiritual ancestry, and the moon being the mankind ancestry. There's the spiritual Atman that's connected to the Brahman, of the spirit of my personal reincarnated soul. And then there's the moon, which is the ancestors that are other souls that are entangled with mine through Pitris and Matris. So these are two different lineages of selfhood, right? So let's start scratching into Chapter 8, the Path of the Luminaries. This is the beginning of the chapter. What we read is, in a Rig Vedic hymn dedicated to Agni Vaishvanara, and that's Agni who abides in all things, Rishi Vamadeva reveals his transcendental vision. I have heard that there are two pathways open to the experienced elders, to enlightened persons and to ordinary mortals. This entire universe, which is between the paternal heaven and the maternal earth, proceeds on its way by these two paths. Again, this is Rig Veda, Mandala 10. Here, Vamadeva mystically speaks of two paths between heaven and earth. These paths are traveled by all, the wise elder, the great sage, and the ordinary human mortal. In another shukta, announcing the marriage of the sun's daughter Surya to the moon Soma, a different rishi has the same revelation. He envisions that one path leads to the ancestors, Pitriyana, and is safeguarded by Pusan, the lord of the paths, while another path leads to the Devas, the Devayana, who are overlorded by Agni. And in Rig Veda, this is also Mandala 10. Of all the yawns today. In Rig Veda Mandala 10, we read, "Let Pusan, the wise, the guardian of the universe, whose cattle are never lost, cause thee to move forthwith from this world, i.e., to aid in your departure from this world. May he hand thee over to these ancestors, and may Agni entrust thee to the benevolent gods." So we can see the two different things being conveyed there. It's interesting, the line, "whose cattle are never lost," which means you can't run from the good or bad karma that you carry with you. Now, in the Upanishads, the path of the Devas, the Devayana, is called Uttarayana Marga. It's the northern path. It proceeds from the light of the day to the increasing half of the moon, and then to the 6 months that the sun goes down to the north, Uttarayana. It leads to the sun and eventually to Brahman. The path of the ancestors, Pitriyana, is known as Dhuma Marga, the path of smoke. It proceeds from the night to the decreasing half of the moon, and then to the 6 months that the sun goes to the south. That's Dakshinayana. That's basically coming from December, Christmas, up to the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. The Dhuma Marga leads to the ancestors and to the moon. Notice that the first sections of Uttarayana and Dhuma Marga are one and the same. The day and night, the waxing and waning of the moon, and the northern and southern passage of the sun. Such phenomena are visible only from a geocentric perspective, so this section of the path reflects life on Earth. Then the one path diverges into two. The path of the Devas, Devayana, continues to the region of the sun, and that of the ancestors, Pitriyana, leads to the realm of the moon. In the Upanishads, the Devayana is known as a path traversed by souls liberated from embodied life. There is no returning for them. It's nirvana, it's moksha, it's kaivalya. The Pitriyana is traveled by those who must return again to this earth. This is a familiar assertion, one predicated on one's actions, karmas, and the associated results of those actions, the karma phalas. The spiritual goal is liberation of the soul from the material realm through the resolution of previous and current karmas. Once liberated, the imprisoned soul is released, and the body-mind is abdicated from further pain and suffering. Several spiritual paths originate from this premise. One is the path of the renunciate, which involves the removal of the self from the distractions and attractions of this world. In such a state, the seeker maintains a dedicated inward focus. It's kaivalya, the aloneness of seeing, the path of inward resolution of karma. However, the Rig Veda does not speak of the need to withdraw from everyday pleasures and responsibilities. As we have seen, even during the most sacrosanct of ceremonies, that's the Soma Yagna, the great lunar sacrifice ceremony, the Yajamana beseeches the gods for fulfillment of his worldly desires and to support in his householder responsibilities. Indeed, everywhere in the Rig Veda, the Nakshatra Devatas are implored for health, wealth, brave sons, cattle, and so on. Further, the notion of karma is really nowhere mentioned in the Rig Veda. Still, in the above Rig Vedic verses that we just described, the rishis cognize an afterlife. How is one to reconcile such inspired visions of their ancient sages? For the answer to this question, we must look into the spiritual vision of the Vedic man and the concept of sacrifice. Recall, at different points in this text, you can especially find this littered throughout the literature of the author of this book, but also specifically in the chapter dedicated to Soma, which describes the Soma Yagna ceremony. So let's recall that the desired sacrificial result of the Soma Yagna is to achieve a firm footing in both worlds, to attain enlightenment while being firmly established on earth. Placing one foot inside and the other foot outside of the sacrificial grounds, the Yajamana is instructed, do not cut yourself off from heaven and do not cut yourself off from this world. Beautiful. Thus, the Vedas present a different notion. The rishis grandly imagined a means by which the soul attains its highest potential, or its fullest manifestation, while still resident within the body-mind. We have a footnote here that says, for the purposes of this section, the soul is defined as individualized consciousness. The body includes the physical, vital, and mental bodies of that soul. Maybe I'm not reading that correctly. I'm just going to read what it says instead of reiterating. It says, for the purpose of this section, the soul is defined as individualized consciousness. The body includes the physical, vital, and mental bodies. So, the soul is the divine spark, Agni, and the body is the sacred fire altar wherein Agni dwells. The full illumination of the soul, individual consciousness, while encased within nature, which is the Vedic word for material existence, was the spiritual aim of Vedic man. Enlightened awareness, or full illumination of consciousness, is rarely possible in a single lifetime. Such an exquisite endeavor requires an evolutionary continuum of the body and soul from one life to the next. How does this continuum occur? Rishi Vamadeva speaks of transmigration of the soul in terms of paths traversed by the recently deceased between heaven and earth and between earth and heaven. Yet he does not posit a preferred path, or that certain actions or karmas dictate which path will be traveled. Instead, Vamadeva inspires the traveling of both paths, the Pitriyana and the Devayana, by all. This entire universe, which is between the paternal heaven and the maternal earth, proceeds on its way by these two paths. That's a quote from Mandala 10 of the Rig Veda, written by Rishi Vamadeva. As we have seen, the Pitriyana is depicted as the night, the waning moon, and the southern course of the sun. It is a path of decreasing light, or the involution of light into the material realm, where darkness or ignorance prevails. It is the path of the body-mind. With each cycle of life, the body-mind is born anew, encompassing the learnings of previous lives so that physical evolution can continue. This is achieved through the passing down of DNA from one generation to the next. Thus, our physical ancestral lineage, one that originates with Manu Vaivashvata and his sons, aid us on this endeavor. Cool. If the body's continued evolution is made possible through our physical ancestral lineage, what allows for the continuation of the soul's evolution? This is our spiritual ancestral lineage, which originates with the gods and their divine rishi sons. The Devayana is a path of increasing light. The soul travels on this till the realm of light beings, the Devas and Rishis, and onward to the all-encompassing light of the sun before returning once again to embodied life. Hence, the purpose of the soul is not to escape the body. On the contrary, it is to work in tandem with the body, to fully manifest the flames of Agni, the light of the divine, here on earth. Wow, what great writing. This was the notion of the Vedic sacrifice and the concept of service. We are here to bring into manifestation the full presence of the divine within the flesh of materiality. Only then does the soul move beyond the realm of the sun and join as one with Brahman. Only then is the physical being placed on the funeral pyre for the last time and consumed by Agni Kravyada, he who consumes flesh. Hence, the two pathways are the means by which the body and soul proceed along an evolutionary continuum. Vladimir Yatsenko elegantly presents this notion in his article, The Angirasha Rishis and Pitris. Here, he summarizes the following. Thus, we have two kinds of ancestors, or forefathers. We have the fathers of our souls, the Angirasa Rishis, and the fathers of ourselves, our bodies, the Pitris. Being our fathers, they are both referred to in the Rig Veda as our forefathers, Pitris. The Angirasa Rishis are responsible for the evolution of consciousness, and the Pitris are responsible for the mutation of nature. They are both powers of the soul. Only one type is oriented towards the growth of consciousness, whereas the other towards the change in the being in order to suit that growth. The path of one type is heading towards liberation, that's the Devayana, whereas the path of the other is locked in moving within the manifestation of the being, and by moving within, it brings about the mutation, that's Pitriyana. Most startling is the realization that just as creation is a mystery to the rishis, which we have a quote here that says, "Who really knows? Who here will proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation?" That comes from Mandala 10 of the Rig Veda. So most startling is the realization that just as creation is a mystery to the rishis, so too is the outcome of creation. Who really can be certain what lies ahead? Oh, wonderful. In the beginning, we have a quote here. There was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night nor of day. That one, Tadekam, breathed windless by its own impulse. Other than that one, there was nothing beyond. That comes from Rig Veda Mandala 10. Now, out of desire to know itself, that one took the plunge into darkness and entered into a dynamic process enveloped within the confines of time and space. That one multiplied 1,000,000-fold. Although the exact outcome remains unknown, an organized structure or process of evolving universal intelligence guides that outcome. This is the notion of Rita, or dynamic truth, universal intelligence actively unfolding through a structured process of self-reflection and self-learning. It's consciousness creating itself in order to experience itself. And this consciousness has an intelligence. It's an amazing thing to read. Douglas Brooks elegantly illustrates this concept. As we peer out into the universe, we see gaseous bundles of stars that appear inchoate, nothing but an enormous collection of matter and gases. Given a few tens of millions of years, what appears as disorganized bundles of matter, mass, and energy turns into beautiful spiral spinning forms of orderly galaxies. That comes from an introduction to the history and practice of yoga by Douglas Brooks. The author continues by saying, "We are each participants in this grand scheme, universal consciousness evolving and ordering itself within nature. Indeed, as with the 33 divine forces, we are the chosen ones, the select few invited to partake of Soma, the bliss-filled delight of fully evolved consciousness. All of this is possible not despite the body, but because of the body. The Rashi and Nakshatra-based birth chart as well as India's solar and lunar calendars, are remnants of this vision of two paths, the solar Devayana and the lunar Pitriyana. Wow. Nakshatras are of the Pitriyana, the signs are of the Devayana. Let us recall that Rishi Vamadeva cognizes these two paths within the verses of the Rig Veda, the wedding Shukta. Here, Surya, the daughter of the sun, is wed to the moon, Soma. All of the gods attend this most celebratory occasion with great earnest and joy. They are here to witness the joining together of Surya, who symbolizes the soul, and Soma, who symbolizes the body. The union of this divine couple represents the uniting of the soul with the body. Surya and Soma seal their commitment to one another with the following oath. May the entire ensemble of the invited guests, all the divine beings, unite hearts of both of us. May we be calm and united like the mixed waters. May we be united like the vital breaths. May both of us be in unison like the Creator and His creation. May we be one like the preceptor and his disciple. This comes from Rig Veda, Mandala 10. Their wedding takes place on the new moon day of Uttara Falguni. The year is approximately 4000 BC, and it's the beginning of the winter solstice. The Vishvadevas unite in song and dance as they witness the couple's divine commitment and simultaneous commencement of the sun and moon along a path of increasing light. Wow. I'm really glad I read that. That was so tantric. That was creation. That was amazing. I think I had an intention. I've read that section of this book before, and I almost had an intention of making it its own video. And it probably could, but it makes sense for me to have kept it in the video on Magha, because there's a necessary cosmology being conveyed in this video. Maybe someday I'll piece it out and make it as the grand cosmology. We shall see how that goes. But thanks to everybody for being a part of that one. That one was an important reading. Now, everybody, we have one last reading to go. We've been talking about Magha from the Taittiriya Brahmana. Now, this next section is coming from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas by the author named Radha. This author, as I often talk about in this part of the video, this author is a sidereal astrologer. So she has the idea that the sidereal, the nakshatras and the signs are combined. And so there's often times where we have to take with a grain of salt what an author says about a nakshatra. For example, Magha in the sidereal astrologers is considered to be only in Leo. So oftentimes people will correlate Magha with Leo-like qualities, always inherently. But as we know, it's possible, we don't know for sure, but it's possible that there are parts of Magha that fall into Virgo. I'd say that's pretty well the case. The first bit of Virgo likely falls into Magha as well. So this is why we have to kind of be careful in when we're reading this author's take on the Magha Native, we have to make sure that we're being mindful and watchful of cues where their artistic license might pull in an idea of the Magha Native as being strictly Leo-like, or even to have the qualities of its nakshatra, Vimshotri Lord, which is known to be Ketu. So these distortions can happen for this author, but this author is still very sharp, well-researched, and usually most of their stuff comes from a positive assertion of her knowledge of the nakshatras. You can check out my other videos where I describe the deities of the nakshatras. It comes from this author. So she's very well researched in all things Vedic. We just have to, in today's day and age, as explorers of the ancient mythos of the nakshatras in a modern context with tropical astrology, we have to be mindful of where we get our information. Doesn't mean it's useless information. We just have to pick through the seeds. Got to pick out the stems, you know? So let's dig into it. This is the Magha Native. Magha is deeply connected with the ancient ancestry of man. It's a divine lineage originating with the rishis, who are offsprings of the gods, as well as Manu Vaivashvata and his imperial sons. As we've just learned, if you watch the video talking about the deity of Magha, which is the Pitris that I've created, we learned that there's two different pathways to self-realization of the lineage of the Pitris. There's the what did we call it? It was the Pitriana, which relates to the moon path of ancestry coming from a common biological DNA man. That's the Pitriana, the path of the moon. And then there's the Devayana, who follows the path of the sun, of the tropical astrology, of the soul, of the individuated soul consciousness of the Atman, that comes from something that's beyond the biological body. So, consistent with this exalted lineage, Magha translates as the mighty one, or the great one. The star of Magha, now this is a bit of astronomy, again coming from a sidereal practitioner. The star of Magha resides in the majestic mane of the lion, the Leo constellation. And its Yogatara star is Regulus, which the Western people have defined as Alpha Leonis. And it's a star referred to as the Little King due to its magnificent luminosity. So, again, this is somebody who believes the constellation of Leo is a fixed, set thing. So that's the caveat that I'm going to give there. But it is true that Regulus is the star that is referred to when we talk about Magha, the nakshatra. Thank you, Florignan. Thanks for enjoying the video here today. So, the Magha native often exudes an air of royalty or preeminence. The Magha native has likely dedicated time to tracing his family lineage and his family heritage, which would include several notable ancestors. Fields involved in genealogy and/or genetics attract the attention of the Magha native, and this may evolve into a full-time career for them. Remember, this is usually when this book describes a native, they're usually referring to the person who has the moon in Magha as well as the ascendant in Magha. So examples of careers that might be good for a Magha native include forensics, medical genetics, wildlife biology, clinical geneticists, a genetic counselor, and so on. Likewise, books on the life and traditions of ancient times find a place on this native's bookshelf. A little bit of anthropological interest is involved in there. Now we learn that L. Ron Hubbard had the moon in Magha. He is the founder of the Church of Scientology. Hubbard held some unusual views regarding ancient life here on Earth. Wow, this totally makes sense. When I think of Hubbard, remember, Magha can be kind of, severe or rough and fierce in the way that they convey their stuff. It's interesting that Hubbard had a lot of backlash for his very interesting ways of understanding human lineage. According to Hubbard, somebody called Xenu, the dictator of the Galactic Confederacy, brought billions of people to Earth 75 million years ago. These people were all killed by hydrogen bombs. This theory was incorporated into Scientology, which postures that the immortal spirits of these aliens adhere to humans, causing spiritual harm. Wild. Now, back onto the Magha native. The Magha native holds great respect for their elders. Perhaps the Magha native is particularly close to a grandparent or a great aunt or uncle. For those family members who are deceased, the native senses their watchful presence and at times even seeks their advice and guidance. The native is peculiarly adept at communicating with helpers from the other side, both family members and others. Getting into the supernatural and channeling and mediumship and this kind of stuff. Now, a professional field that requires such adeptness has great appeal to the native. Examples include shamanism, as well as mediumship. The proficiency of connecting with souls on the other side is not dissimilar to the ability to communicate with animals and or nature in general. In fact, telepathy and clairvoyance are also related to this aptitude. This is all very Magha stuff. Now, the sacrificial wish of Magha's ruling devatas is to prosper among their ancestors. That is a phrase that comes from the latter part of the Taittiriya Brahmana. This wish to prosper amongst their ancestors may manifest in one or more ways in the life of the Magha native. Firstly, the native has a strong desire to carry forward the notable accomplishments of their lineage. Secondly, the Magha native is likely to prosper from his relatives and or extended family members. Perhaps he's afforded a privileged position in the family business or bestowed a handsome inheritance. Note that one translation of Magha is wealth. Remember, it's gifts, it's rewards, it's something coming from the patrilineal focus or goal or objective of a whole family. If a person aligns themselves with that, they're going to be served as a vehicle and vessel for the interests of the ongoing family lineage. Where else is the family lineage going to channel its resources but through the person who's receptive to it? So this is why these people can get these things, these privileges. if they're open to it, if they're conscious of it, and naturally they probably would be if they have the moon of the ascendant or any prominence of planets in Magha. Lastly, a strong paternal sense draws the native's attention to those opportunities that require wisdom and maturity. The Magha native may be considered an elder within their community, or become the leader of a state or a nation. The native assumes this same position within their extended family, where their advice and leadership are often sought. Margaret Thatcher is somebody who had the moon in Magha. She exemplifies this aspect of Magha. Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990, and prior to this, she was the leader of the Conservative Party for nearly 15 years. Now, should Magha be grossly afflicted, this can indicate a need for the native to work through some problematic DNA passed down from their ancestors, or as a result of their own past lives. Through their purification, however that goes, the native releases future generations from inherited or genetically encoded vasanas, which are patterns that are potentially destructive or counterproductive. Stopping the generational trauma. That's a very Magha thing. And sometimes, it's almost like a person who has to experience a disease or some kind of genetic DNA mutation or malfunction, and they are sick for a long time, but eventually they get over it. It's like when the plague came through in medieval England in the 1600s, it wiped out about 90% of the population. 10% of the population for some reason survived and was allowed to continue on, and they got used to the virus, the plague. Their bodies succumbed to it, even though they were probably sick for a long time before they could get it. So they took on this illness in order to purify it. In the same way, a Magha person with gross afflictions in the nakshatra of Magha might find themselves with counterproductive and potentially destructive vasanas. It's genetically encoded characteristics that they have to purify somehow. Susie Underwood is correct when she says a Magha native might be the one in the family to help heal familial curses or traumas. That's correct, Susie. And unfortunately, usually, the only way out of it is through it for the Magha native. It's very possible that afflictions in Magha can show things that continue on that don't get healed, that the person is just afflicted with them and can't move through them. But if the whole chart is conducive to evolution, it's possible that Magha Nakshatra natives will find themselves entangled in a family that's full of trauma and curses that need healing, and they end up being the person for whom a huge part of their energy, positively speaking, is getting over these curses and traumas, helping the family get through it. It's a beautiful soldier consciousness that can be occurring there if that's the case. Now, finally, let's recall in the Rig Veda that Surya's grand wedding procession commences in Magha. The bridal procession of the sun's daughter, Surya, which the divine mother creator Aditi dispatches, moves along. The oxen of their chariot are whipped along in the Magha constellation. She's taken to her husband's house in the Falguna constellations. And that comes from the Rig Veda. So thus, as with the Falgunis, Magha gives a special affiliation with grand and grandiose celebrations, celebrating the greatness that is, reflective of, a lot of these nakshatras have a chronological narrative. The chronology of the marriage being pushed along in Magha leads to the marriage that happens in the Purva and Uttara Falgunis. It's not always obvious, and this book doesn't always convey the chronology, but in this case, it's a useful thing to see how Magha is leading to the Falgunis. And so Magha is conducive to marriages and to large events and celebrations in this way, shooing them forward. Wonderful. What an amazing reading. I hope you guys enjoyed that. My name is Dustin Cormier. This has been another episode of How to Rock Astrology. This has been us learning about Magha and the Pitris and what they all mean together. So I hope you guys are enjoying this series. I hope you're getting some good, juicy information out of it. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Magha Native. Stay tuned. I got more stuff coming out. I got a book that's going to be released eventually. Keep your eyes out for it. It's called Eternal Soul Afternoon. And I'm going to have more videos coming out. We got lots of nakshatra stuff still to be talked about, and lots of stuff on the Lagna, the Rising Signs series that I'm still moving through as well. I hope to see you then. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you to my friend Susie Underwood for always hanging out with me. And for everybody who watches my videos. I appreciate you all very much. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you the next time I see you, y'all. Om Tat Sat. Thanks, Susie. And thanks, everybody. Take care.